Pilot tells black teen to sit where you belong, doesn't realize her dad owns the airline. Have you ever witnessed a single moment that alters the course of countless lives? Picture this: a bustling terminal at John F. Kennedy International Airport, a weary yet determined teenage girl, and a pilot whose arrogance blinds him to the damage he's about to unleash. All it takes is one casual, cutting remark to spark chaos. The pilot orders this young passenger to sit where she belongs, not realizing she's the daughter of the airline's owner. In that instant, a web of drama, secrets, and inevitable retribution begins to spin, proving that no one knows how a single act can reshape destiny. A low, rumbling thundercloud loomed over New York City, casting an ominous grey across the afternoon sky. The commuter traffic outside John F. Kennedy International Airport, JFK, crawled at a snail's pace, horns blaring, engines idling, and frustrated travelers checking their watches or phones. Inside Terminal 4, travelers navigated a labyrinth of check-in counters and lines, occasionally glancing up at the overhead displays indicating flight statuses and gate numbers. The atmosphere was electric with movement, the hum of announcements, and the jostling of roller bags. Among the crowd stood 16-year-old Simone Aldridge. She was tall for her age, her slender build complemented by a confident posture and an unmistakable spark in her dark eyes. She didn't flaunt wealth or prestige. In fact, she wore an unassuming jean jacket and a pair of black leggings. Her curly hair, styled in a simple ponytail, framed her delicate features. She gripped her boarding pass, indicating Delta Airlines Flight 1927 to Los Angeles, in her right hand. Simone's father, Harold Aldridge, was a name known to almost every employee of Delta Airlines, though few recognized his face. Harold had taken a once struggling regional carrier and reshaped it into an international powerhouse. The Aldridge family name was listed at the top of numerous philanthropic endeavors, from educational grants to youth mentoring programs. Yet Harold chose to keep a relatively low profile, preferring that any mention of his name be tied to the business or philanthropic efforts rather than his personal affairs. This anonymity allowed Simone a semblance of normalcy, free from overt fawning or invasive curiosity. Simone's mother, Elena, stood by her side, scanning the line for flight check-ins. A gracious, elegant woman, Elena exuded calmness, though her maternal instinct sharpened whenever her daughter went anywhere unaccompanied. She offered Simone a small smile, as if to say everything would be fine. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" Elena asked, gently brushing a stray curl away from Simone's forehead. Simone nodded. "Absolutely, Mom. Besides, Dad always says, traveling solo teaches you self-reliance." Elena's eyes flickered with pride. "He does say that. You'll do great, honey. Just promise you'll text me as soon as you land in LA, and while you're at that friend's house, call me each night before bed." Simone smiled, rolling her eyes with a hint of teenage exasperation. "You've got it. I'll text, call, and do everything short of sending daily postcards." Elena handed Simone a small carry-on suitcase and patted it. "You have everything you need, right? Passport? ID? Phone charger?" "All checked," Simone assured her. Just then, an announcement crackled through the overhead speakers. "Attention passengers for Delta Flight 1927 to Los Angeles. Please proceed to gate B36 for boarding." Simone took a deep breath. "That's me." Elena pulled her into a brief, warm embrace. "Have a wonderful time, sweetheart. I'll miss you." With a final wave, Simone set off, weaving through the crowd. She only turned around once to see her mother standing by the security checkpoint, a proud smile on Elena's face. At gate B36, the boarding process was already underway. Simone had a ticket in first class, not because she flaunted her father's position, but because Harold insisted on ensuring she had a comfortable flight. It was a luxury she'd grown used to, with a mix of gratitude and mild embarrassment. After all, most of her friends flew economy, but her father had insisted, "If you're traveling alone, I want you to have the best experience possible." Making her way down the jet bridge, Simone marveled at the Boeing 787 Dreamliner waiting to whisk her away to California. The sleek, modern lines of the aircraft were a testament to design and engineering, a symbol of progress in the aviation world. She momentarily wished she had inherited her father's passion for airplanes. Harold could talk for hours about flight specs and aerodynamic shapes, but Simone mostly liked to look at them. Inside the airplane, a flight attendant guided her to her seat. The first-class cabin was spacious and plush, with leather seats that reclined almost into beds. Simone found her place seat 2A right by the window. She settled in, stowed her bag, and politely smiled at the flight attendant who offered her water. Within minutes, a handful of other passengers took their places in the first-class cabin, each looking at their phones or flipping through magazines. Simone recognized no one, and she liked that. Solitude had a charm. She could drift in her own thoughts, or maybe watch a movie in peace. Just as Simone fastened her seatbelt, a man in a crisp pilot's uniform strode into the first-class cabin. He was in his late 40s, tall, with a neatly trimmed moustache and a posture that screamed authority. His shoulders were squared, and his gaze scanned the cabin as though silently assessing each passenger. This was Captain Donovan Royce. Captain Royce had joined Delta decades ago, working his way up from co-pilot to captain. In his mind, he had more or less seen it all. While he was undeniably skilled and professional in the cockpit, those close to him knew he harbored a certain distaste for privileged travelers, particularly those he deemed unworthy of the seats they occupied. Royce prided himself on having come from humble beginnings, and he viewed many first-class passengers as spoiled, lazy, or simply there by nepotism. He spotted Simone in seat 2A, a teenage girl who, in his mind, had no business being in first class. He offered a curt nod to the other passengers, but when his eyes landed on Simone, a subtle frown tugged at his mouth. She offered him a polite smile, which he barely acknowledged. As Captain Royce made his way to the cockpit, he mumbled something to a flight attendant, whose eyes momentarily widened. Simone couldn't hear what was said, but she felt a pang of discomfort at his scrutinizing gaze. Simone tried to brush off the pilot's demeanor, reminding herself that not everyone in the airline industry was warm and welcoming. However, she found it odd how directly the pilot had stared at her, almost like he was silently demanding she explain her presence in first class. She turned her attention to her phone, sending a quick text to her mother, boarded, all good so far. See you in a few days. She glanced around at the other passengers. Most seemed occupied with their own pre-flight routines, adjusting seatbelts, flipping through the in-flight magazines, or answering last-minute emails. Directly behind her sat a businessman in a well-tailored suit, tapping fervently on a laptop. Across the aisle, an older couple quietly chatted, excited about a vacation or possibly visiting grandchildren. Simone felt comforted by this small snapshot of normalcy. But a few minutes later, something strange happened. The flight attendant who had been distributing water earlier approached Simone with an apologetic expression. Her name tag read Carla. She leaned in and whispered, "Excuse me, miss. There might have been a slight mix-up with seating arrangements. Can I see your boarding pass for a moment?" Simone complied, feeling her pulse quicken. Carla studied the pass, looked at the seat number and nodded. "Yes, this is definitely seat 2A, she said softly. "No issue there." Simone tilted her head, confused. "Is there a problem?" Carla hesitated. "I'll check with the captain, but please don't worry about it." That final comment did little to soothe Simone's nerves. She watched as Carla discreetly conferred with the lead flight attendant, who cast a worried glance toward the cockpit door. Whatever was happening wasn't standard procedure. Moments later, Captain Royce himself emerged from the cockpit, ignoring the watchful gazes of the other passengers. With purposeful strides, he crossed the first-class cabin to stand beside Simone's seat. He cleared his throat loudly, drawing more attention than was probably necessary. "Excuse me, young lady," he said in a voice loud enough for passengers in the neighboring rows to hear. "May I see your boarding pass?" Simone blinked in surprise, but handed it over without protest. Captain Royce examined the pass with a furrowed brow. "You're in first class," he stated, as though making an accusation. "Yes, sir," Simone replied, trying to remain respectful, his lips pursed. "This is a premium seat. Are you flying unaccompanied?" "Yes," Simone said again, heart pounding. She noticed a few curious glances from around the cabin. "My ticket was purchased by my father." Captain Royce narrowed his eyes. The tension in the air was palpable. "And who exactly is your father?" Simone's cheeks warmed. She rarely liked to explain who her dad was. "Harold Aldridge," she said quietly. If the name meant anything to Royce, he gave no indication. "Well, Miss Aldridge, it's not often we have minors in this section. The airline has certain policies. I'm going to have to ask you to move to a seat that's more appropriate." Simone's face went slack. "More appropriate? My father specifically bought me this seat." "I'm not doing anything wrong," Captain Royce cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Young lady, you know exactly what I mean. Let's not make a scene here. Economy is that way." He pointed down the aisle. A collective hush fell over the nearby passengers. Simone heard a few gasps, and one or two murmured objections. The pilot's tone carried a condescension that was impossible to ignore. She felt her heart pounding, unsure how to respond. "Sir," she began, her voice wavering, "I have a legitimate boarding pass. I haven't done anything to warrant being moved." Captain Royce's eyes flickered with annoyance, but beneath that flicker was something deeper, a disdain that sent a chill down Simone's spine. He took a step closer, lowered his voice, and delivered a blow. "Sit where you belong." Simone's breath caught in her throat. She realized then that the pilot's hostility was not just about her age or the seat. It was something more insidious. There was a challenge in his eyes, a quiet refusal to accept that she had a right to be there. She felt an overwhelming urge to speak up, but she also felt small beneath his glare. Passengers around them shifted uncomfortably, and one older gentleman called out, "Is everything all right here, Captain?" But Captain Royce ignored him, his gaze locked on Simone. Slowly, Simone stood. Her voice trembled as she addressed him. "My father wouldn't want me to move, and I'm sure the airline's regulations allow minors in first class." Captain Royce let out a thin, humorless laugh. "Your father's not here. I am, and I'm telling you to move." The entire exchange, while short, felt excruciatingly long to Simone. She could sense the pilot's anger, the hush of onlooking passengers, and the flight attendants who seemed too intimidated to intervene. In that moment, Simone felt her confidence falter, replaced by confusion and fear. Clutching her carry-on, she squeezed past the pilot into the aisle. The man behind her, who had observed the scene with mounting outrage, whispered, "Unbelievable." Simone offered him a grateful, apologetic smile before following the flight attendant who was now beckoning her toward economy. With a steely gaze, Captain Royce retreated to the cockpit, leaving a wake of uncertainty behind him. Several first-class passengers exchanged concerned looks, some wondering if they should say something. One woman, who appeared to be in her 50s, spoke up in a hushed tone to Carla, the flight attendant. "Is that really appropriate? The girl had a valid ticket." Carla bit her lip, her eyes darting toward the cockpit door. She shrugged helplessly. "He's the captain. It's ultimately his decision." Simone found herself ushered to a middle seat in economy, far from the comfort of first class. The overhead bin was nearly full, forcing her to jam her carry-on beneath the seat. She settled in, her heart still hammering in her chest. She wanted to call her mother, to call her father, or at least text someone who could help. But the cabin doors would be closing soon. The crew was already announcing that phones needed to be set to airplane mode. She told herself she would text the moment the plane touched down in Los Angeles. Passengers around Simone offered sympathetic glances. None had witnessed the initial exchange, but they sensed her distress. A kindly older woman in the next seat patted Simone's arm. "It's okay, dear. Everything will be fine once we're in the air." Simone mustered a small smile, but deep down, her mind raced. The pilot's words replayed in her head, "Sit where you belong." She felt a flare of indignation. If only he knew, if only he realized that her father was not just a random man, but Harold Aldridge. Then again, Simone recalled all the times her father said, "Don't throw my name around like a shield." So she had tried to stand her ground politely, with reason, but it hadn't mattered. As the plane taxied onto the runway, Simone stared out the window at the sprawling airport tarmac. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. Fear, anger, disbelief. She reminded herself that once she landed in Los Angeles, she could contact her father, and the issue would be addressed properly. For now, she'd just endure the flight. Beside her, the older woman gave a reassuring smile and introduced herself as Mara. Simone returned the smile, grateful for a small act of kindness. During takeoff, Simone's stomach lurched with the familiar sensation of leaving the ground. She watched the airport shrink beneath them until the plane soared above the cloud line. The seatbelt sign pinged off, and flight attendants began their in-flight service. Simone tried to distract herself by flipping through the entertainment system's movie catalogue, but her mind kept drifting back to Captain Royce. She felt humiliated by the public dressing down. More than that, she felt anger at the underlying prejudice. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Royce settled into a routine flight pattern. His co-pilot, a younger man named Darius Kim, noticed Royce's dark mood. They had flown together often, but Kim couldn't recall a time Royce had singled out a passenger so directly before. "Everything okay, Captain?" Kim asked gently, keeping his eyes on the instrument panel. Royce nodded curtly, not bothering to hide his annoyance. "Fine. Just a bit of a brat in first class who didn't know her place." Kim swallowed, sensing there was more to the story. "She had a valid ticket, though." Royce snorted. "Probably. But there are some people who just don't belong up there, especially kids who think they own the world." Kim furrowed his brows. He didn't want to challenge the pilot's authority mid-flight, but he also felt uneasy about Royce's attitude. Still, he chose to keep silent. The sky was calm, the flight path clear, and it seemed prudent not to stir the pot at 30,000 feet. A few hours into the flight, while Simone tried to doze off, back in New York, Harold Aldridge was in his office at Delta Airlines headquarters. A tall, imposing figure with grey at his temples, Harold was an emblem of composure. An unsettling feeling tugged at him, as if an intuition that something was off with his daughter. Usually, Simone sent him a pre-takeoff text, a small tradition of theirs. He had received no such text this time. Trying to brush off the worry, he resumed a phone conversation with a board member, discussing expansions and new pilot training programs. Yet, the slight anxiety gnawed at him, enough that he ended the call earlier than planned. He dialed Simone's phone, only to get an automated message that her phone was out of range or turned off a standard scenario while in flight, but it did little to quell his concern. Harold sighed, looking at a photo on his desk. Simone at age 10, beaming with pride, sitting in a cockpit next to an equally grinning pilot. She had always loved sitting in the cockpit before flights, hearing the pilot's flight plan and occasionally pressing a harmless button or two with permission. Simone was generally well liked by the flight crews, who found her curiosity endearing. He turned his attention to an email from the operations department. A pilot named Donovan Royce had logged a complaint about a disruptive passenger on flight 1927 to Los Angeles. The email was flagged as urgent. Harold's eyes narrowed. That was Simone's flight. He scanned the email, feeling his pulse quicken. Minor passenger in first class causing disturbance, flight capacity issues, pilot requested passenger move to economy. We are investigating. Harold leaned back in his chair, the weight of concern settling in his chest. Simone? Disruptive? That didn't sound like her at all. He typed a quick reply to the operations manager, requesting further details and an immediate follow-up. Then he tried to settle, but restlessness gripped him. Something about this situation felt very wrong. Back on the plane, the flight had been smooth so far. However, the captain came on the intercom to announce they might experience mild turbulence. Simone took the opportunity to stand up, stretch her legs, and head to the lavatory. As she navigated the aisle, she passed through the divider between economy and first class. There, she glimpsed the luxurious seats and was reminded of the humiliation she had experienced. She noticed Carla, the flight attendant, meeting her eyes with a look of regret. Simone offered a thin, polite smile. After freshening up in the lavatory, Simone was on her way back when she overheard a small commotion near the galley in first class. Another flight attendant, a man in his 30s, was talking in hushed but agitated tones with Captain Royce, who had stepped out of the cockpit. Simone couldn't hear every word, but she caught snippets. Not policy. She had a valid ticket. Please reconsider. She froze when she heard Royce snap back. I won't have my authority questioned. She can buy her way in all she wants, but not on my flight. Simone's cheeks burned. Any doubts she had about the pilot's motivations were erased. It wasn't about her being a minor or about some seat mix-up. It was an outright display of prejudice and abuse of power. She quickly scurried back to her seat before she could be spotted. Returning to her seat, Simone tried to maintain her composure. She found a distraction in rummaging through her carry-on for a book she'd brought. The older woman beside her, Mara, noticed Simone's trembling hands. "Dear, you look upset. Is everything okay?" Simone paused, debating whether to open up. Finally, she whispered, "The pilot forced me out of first class. I had a valid ticket, but he just didn't want me up there." A wave of sympathy crossed Mara's face. "Is it because you're young, or—" Simone swallowed, unable to utter the words that formed in her mind. "He did it because I'm black." She wasn't entirely certain, but the pilot's hostility felt rooted in something deeper than just her being a teenager. Mara patted her hand gently. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." An hour later, while the plane flew steadily over the Midwest, Simone decided she couldn't wait until Los Angeles to let her parents know what happened. She powered on her phone, ignoring the flight's instructions, just long enough to fire off a quick text to her mum. "Mom, pilot forced me out of first class. Acting weird. Going to talk to Dad as soon as I land. I'm okay, but upset." Before the flight attendants could spot her, she switched the phone back to airplane mode. She slumped against her seat, her heart pounding from the risk of using her phone mid-flight, but her text was sent. She hoped it would trigger some intervention, or at least alert her parents that something was seriously wrong. Elena Aldridge was just about to fix herself a cup of afternoon tea when her phone pinged. She read Simone's message and felt immediate alarm. She dialed Harold's office in a panic. When Harold picked up, she could hear the tension in his voice, even before she spoke. She relayed Simone's text, her words tumbling over one another in worry. Harold's jaw clenched. He explained the email he'd received regarding a disruptive minor in first class, which clearly contradicted Simone's version of events. They both knew Simone wasn't one to cause trouble. Together, they concluded that Simone had been targeted unfairly. Why? They could only guess. "I'll handle it, Elena," Harold promised, though his voice shook with controlled anger. I'm going to request an immediate internal investigation. I'll meet Simone at LAX myself if I can get a flight out there in time." Elena let out a relieved sigh. "Please do." "And Harold, don't let this slide." Harold's grip tightened around his phone. "You know I won't." Within half an hour, Harold had triggered a minor earthquake in Delta Airlines managerial circles. Emails flew back and forth among operations, customer service, and corporate communications, each trying to ascertain the situation on Flight 1927. Most were flabbergasted to learn the passenger in question was Harold Aldridge's daughter. A flurry of frantic messages ensued. Did anyone confirm if the passenger truly was disruptive? "Captain Royce's report is inconsistent with the flight manifest. We need to contact the flight crew or the gate manager." A supervisor at JFK rechecked boarding records, verifying that Simone Aldridge had a valid first-class ticket purchased in full, no anomalies. Another manager tried to contact the flight via in-flight communication channels, but the process was typically reserved for emergencies or vital operational updates. They did manage to confirm with the flight's lead attendant that Simone had been relocated to economy at the pilot's insistence, but the official reason was vague. With each new detail, Harold's anger mounted. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a blatant misuse of authority, potentially fueled by discriminatory attitudes. For Harold, who had spent a lifetime championing equality and positive corporate culture, it was a personal affront. Somewhere over the Rocky Mountains, the flight encountered moderate turbulence, jolting Simone awake from a restless nap. She gripped her armrests, taking slow, deep breaths as the seatbelt sign flickered on. Captain Royce's voice came over the intercom, instructing everyone to remain seated. His tone was clipped, as though he were irritated by the turbulence itself. Simone wondered what might happen when they landed. Would someone be waiting to confront the pilot about his actions? Could her father mobilize that quickly? Simone had no way of knowing. She glanced at her watch. Another 2 hours or so until they reached LAX. Behind the cockpit door, Captain Royce wrestled with a creeping sense that something was off. There had been a series of urgent communications from ground control, instructions that he check in upon landing. He found it odd. Rarely was there such a persistent need for immediate contact, unless there was a security issue or a major operational problem. He convinced himself it was unrelated to the seat incident. After all, he was the pilot, the authority figure in the air. If he deemed a passenger was out of line, that was his call, right? Yet he couldn't shake the nagging sensation that he had stepped out of bounds. But his pride intervened. He had made a decision, and he would stand by it. Admitting he was wrong was not something Donovan Royce did often. The plane landed at Los Angeles International Airport earlier than scheduled, thanks to favorable tailwinds. As they taxied to the gate, Simone felt anxiety prick at her skin. She just wanted to walk off the plane and call her parents. Once the seatbelt sign turned off, Simone stood up, grabbed her carry-on, and filed out of the economy cabin. The older woman, Nara, whispered, "Good luck, dear." Simone nodded her thanks, offering a small smile. From the corner of her eye, she saw Captain Royce by the cockpit door, bidding farewell to disembarking passengers with a forced politeness. His gaze passed over her with disdain. When she reached him, his smile vanished entirely. There was no apology in his eyes, just a cold aloofness as he said, "Have a good day." Simone refused to look away. Summoning her courage, she replied, "You too, Captain." She let her tone carry just a hint of resolute defiance. If he noticed, he gave no sign. Stepping into the terminal, Simone exhaled a long breath, relief and lingering anger swirling in her stomach. She pulled out her phone, switched off airplane mode, and saw a barrage of missed calls and text messages from her mother, father, and even a few unrecognized numbers. She read a text from her mother, "Your dad is flying into LAX ASAP. Wait for him near baggage claim." Another text from her father, "I'm on my way. Sit tight." Are you okay? Simone typed back quickly. Just landed. I'm okay. Meeting you at baggage claim. She passed the gate agent desk, noticing a cluster of airline staff engaged in hushed conversation. The gate agent who had boarded her at JFK recognized her and gave a slight, almost apologetic nod. At baggage claim, Simone found a quiet corner by the carousel for flight 1927. Her phone buzzed. It was Harold calling. Dad? Simone? Are you all right? I'm fine. Just upset. I'm landing in about an hour. Wait for me there, all right? I'll come find you. In the meantime, I've got a local staff member named Chloe who might meet you. She's part of customer relations. She'll take care of you until I arrive. Simone exhaled. Okay, I'll wait. She ended the call, letting the tension in her shoulders loosen a bit. Her father was on his way, and that single fact provided a surge of relief. Captain Royce exited the jet bridge, intending to head straight to the pilot lounge before his next scheduled flight. He was startled to find a uniformed manager waiting for him, a woman in her 50s, hair in a neat bun, her face set in a stern expression. Her name tag read Marcia Velez, Regional Operations Manager. At her side stood another man in a business suit, whose name Royce recognized from corporate memos. Captain Donovan Royce? Marcia asked with a clipped tone. We need a word. Please follow us. Royce blinked. What's this about? Marcia simply repeated, Follow us, Captain. She turned on her heel and led him through a staff-only corridor, eventually arriving at a small conference room near the Delta administrative office. The man in the suit locked the door behind them. What's going on here? Royce demanded, bristling at the unorthodox reception. Marcia wasted no time. We have a serious complaint that you removed a passenger from first class without valid reason and possibly used discriminatory language. That passenger, Captain, was Simone Aldridge. Royce frowned. I'm not sure I understand the significance of that name. The man in the suit spoke up. Her father is Harold Aldridge. Royce's brow furrowed, still not connecting the dots. Marcia folded her arms. Harold Aldridge. The Harold Aldridge. The major shareholder and controlling figure at Delta. The man effectively responsible for your paycheck. A ripple of realization crossed Royce's face. He felt his stomach lurch. He had heard the name. Of course, Harold Aldridge was a near legend in airline circles. He owned a significant stake in Delta and had a large portion of the board's ear. Royce's lips parted, but no words came out. We have to investigate your actions, Marcia continued. Mr. Aldridge is on his way. We'll have to interview you and the flight crew. This is very serious, Captain. Royce tried to regain composure. Look, there was a misunderstanding. Marcia raised a hand, cutting him off. You can explain in detail soon. For now, you're being placed on immediate suspension, pending a formal hearing. We can't have you continuing your next flight. Royce opened his mouth, incredulous. He had never faced such disciplinary action before. You're suspending me. We haven't even... Your next flight has a backup captain already, Marcia said, her voice unwavering. Now, please surrender your pilot ID and wait here until we gather all the facts. Royce's hand shook as he reached for his ID badge. Anger flickered in his eyes. He felt cornered, stripped of his authority, all because of some teenage girl. Inwardly, he told himself, I did nothing wrong. She had no business in first class. This is all one big misunderstanding. Yet he couldn't deny the gnawing terror that Harold Aldridge's influence might end his career in a snap. Back at the baggage claim, Simone was met by Chloe, a warm, bubbly customer relations staff member. Chloe offered Simone a bottle of water and a quiet space to sit in a nearby lounge area. We're so sorry for your experience, Chloe said gently. Your father asked me to make sure you're comfortable until he arrives. Simone nodded, her voice subdued. Thank you. They waited in companionable silence, broken only when Simone's phone buzzed. A text from her friend in LA. Can't wait to see you. Simone typed back that she might be delayed, not diving into details. An hour later, Harold Aldridge swept through the terminal doors, his face etched with concern. The moment Simone saw him, she felt tears threaten to spill. He pulled her into a tight hug, one hand gently resting on her head, shielding her from the curious stares of passers-by. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The airport's hectic background noise faded, leaving them in a cocoon of familial warmth. Harold finally leaned back, surveying his daughter. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice tinged with anger and worry. Simone shook her head. "Not physically. Just, it was humiliating. He made me move to economy, Dad. He told me toss it where I belong." Her voice cracked on the last words. Harold's jaw tightened. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." He looked at Chloe, who offered a sympathetic nod. "There's a conference room upstairs," Chloe said. "We can talk in private." Harold steered Simone toward the elevator, silently vowing that Captain Donovan Royce would face the consequences of his bigotry and abuse of power. Inside a discreet conference room on the upper floor of LAX's Delta administrative offices, Harold Aldridge sat across a long table from Donovan Royce, who was flanked by Marcia Velez and two corporate legal representatives. Simone stood behind Harold, with Chloe by her side for support. Captain Royce's eyes flicked to Simone, but the steely look on Harold's face discouraged any direct interaction. Marcia cleared her throat. "Let's begin. Captain Royce, can you please state your version of events concerning the removal of Miss Aldridge from first class?" Royce straightened in his chair. He glanced at Harold, then the lawyers, choosing his words carefully. I noticed a minor traveling unaccompanied in first class. I had concerns about a safety issue since she was not accompanied by an adult. I followed standard procedure by relocating her to economy." One of the lawyers raised an eyebrow. "Standard procedure? There is no policy that forbids unaccompanied minors from sitting in first class as long as they possess a valid ticket." Royce stumbled. She appeared disruptive. Disruptive? How? Harold interjected, his voice low, threaded with anger. Royce floundered. She looked out of place. I believed she was not in her assigned seat. The seat was premium, and I suspected there was a ticketing error. Marcia glanced at some documents in front of her. The gate records and the flight manifest both confirmed Simone Aldridge was assigned to seat 2A legitimately. There was no ticketing error. A tense silence followed. Royce fiddled with the pen in front of him, clearly grasping for an explanation that would absolve him. Finally, Simone stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "He told me toss it where I belong. He kept demanding I leave first class. That's not standard procedure. That's targeted harassment." Royce's eyes flashed defensively. "I didn't mean it like that." Harold slammed a palm on the table, making everyone jump. Enough. The force of his fury was contained, yet potent. "I've worked in this industry for decades, building a culture that embraces diversity and treats passengers with respect, no matter their race, age, or background. You violated our core principles. You humiliated my daughter in front of an entire cabin." Royce's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. "We're here to investigate," Marcia said calmly. "Captain Royce, your actions appear to be without justification. This not only breaches Delta's protocol on passenger service, but may also infringe upon anti-discrimination policies. We will be reporting these findings to the board." One of the corporate lawyers added, "Your suspension will be immediate and indefinite, pending a full disciplinary hearing. We'll also consider whether you are fit to continue employment." For a moment, Royce looked as if he might argue. Then he seemed to deflate, the weight of his impending downfall too heavy to contest. He cast a final, hollow glance at Simone, who stood firm, refusing to be intimidated any longer. After Captain Royce was dismissed, Harold turned to his daughter, taking both her hands in his. "I'm sorry you went through that. No passenger, no person should ever face that kind of treatment. Simone nodded, relief evident in her tear-brimmed eyes. Thank you for standing up for me, Dad. Harold pulled her into another tight embrace. Over the years, he'd fought battles for fair labor practices, for better pilot training, for diversity in hiring. But never had he imagined he would have to confront racial or age-based discrimination aimed at his own daughter from within his beloved airline. News of the incident spread rapidly through Delta's internal channels. Flight attendants from across the network posted messages of support for Simone in private forums. One thread quickly garnered hundreds of comments from employees recounting their own experiences with Captain Royce's difficult demeanor. Some described subtle, possibly prejudiced remarks. Others detailed how Royce had always acted as though first class was his private kingdom. Harold's daughter quickly became a symbol within the company, uniting employees who believed strongly in the airline's stated values. As the story percolated, it even reached external news sources, though the company's communications team tried to keep details as minimal as possible. Still, whispers of the pilot who offended the daughter of the airline's owner drifted through the aviation grapevine. Simone stayed with her friend in LA for the next few days, as originally planned. Though she tried to enjoy the visit, going to the beach, shopping at the Grove, sampling delicious food trucks, her mind occasionally flashed back to the humiliating moment on the plane. She confided in her friend, describing the pilot's sneer and those words, "Sit where you belong." The friend was outraged, encouraging Simone to stay vocal about the injustice. At night, Simone would call her mother, each conversation dripping with maternal concern. Harold also checked in frequently, updating Simone on the progress of the formal investigation. More flight attendants had given statements, corroborating Simone's account. Carla, who had served her water in first class, provided a particularly damning testimony against Captain Royce, disclosing she overheard him muttering disparaging comments before he approached Simone's seat. 1 week later, a formal hearing was held at Delta's corporate headquarters in Atlanta. Captain Royce was present with a union representative. Harold did not attend in person, wanting to avoid overshadowing the process. Instead, Simone attended via video conference, flanked by an attorney who specialized in such matters. The hearing was methodical. Witnesses, including Carla, the flight attendant, and another cabin crew member, testified about Royce's behavior. They confirmed that Simone posed no disruption and that her ticket was valid. They described his remark, "Sit where you belong," as carrying a tone of blatant discrimination. Royce's union representative tried to argue that the pilot was within his rights to address potential passenger misconduct, but the board members seemed unconvinced. At the end of the hearing, after a brief deliberation, the board recommended immediate termination of Captain Royce's employment. He would also be barred from reapplying to Delta or any of its subsidiaries. The severity of the consequence reflected the airline's zero-tolerance policy for racial or discriminatory harassment. A wave of relief washed over Simone when the final verdict was announced. Even after losing his job, Captain Royce was compelled by the hearing's outcome to issue a formal written apology to Simone. It read stiffly, lacking genuine remorse, to Miss Simone Aldridge, "I acknowledge that my words and actions during Flight 1927 were inappropriate. I regret the discomfort and inconvenience caused by my decision to remove you from first class. I hope you will accept this apology." Donovan Royce Simone read it once, her lips curling in disdain. It was an apology forced by corporate decree, not a reflection of true contrition. She set it aside, telling her father she had no interest in responding to it. The industry took note of Captain Royce's termination. Online aviation forums buzzed with debates. Some praised Delta's firm stance, while others argued the punishment was too harsh for a single incident. But those who had flown under Royce's command were quick to point out that his discriminatory attitudes were not new. They had merely found a high-profile target in Simone Aldridge. Rival airlines also observed the situation closely, many reminding their own employees about strict anti-discrimination policies. The aviation union, while defending pilots' rights, also conceded that Royce's case was difficult to support, given the overwhelming evidence. Simone returned to New York a week later, meeting her father at JFK Airport. He escorted her home personally, not trusting anyone else after what had happened. During the car ride, Simone stared out at the passing skyline, lost in thought. Harold asked, "How are you feeling, sweetie?" Simone sighed, angry, still, but also empowered. I realized how important it is to stand up for yourself and for others who might face the same thing but are too scared to speak out. Her father reached over, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm proud of you, Simone." She offered him a small smile. "I'm proud of you too. You backed me up and showed me what leadership can do. Some people might have let it slide to avoid the hassle or the publicity. You didn't." Harold's eyes shone with fatherly pride. "I hope it sets an example, not just for you, but for everyone." A few days later, at the urging of the board and to quell any media speculation, Harold agreed to hold a brief press conference. He stood at a podium in a modest room inside Delta's New York offices. Simultaneously, cameras broadcasted his words to journalists and interested parties nationwide. Harold began by summarizing the situation factually. Simone was a ticketed first-class passenger. Captain Royce violated airline protocol. An investigation was conducted and appropriate action was taken. He emphasized that Delta Airlines remained committed to ensuring all passengers, regardless of age or race, were treated with respect. Simone stood off to the side, watchful. She didn't speak publicly, but her mere presence spoke volumes, a calm, dignified reminder that prejudice can touch anyone, even the daughter of an airline owner. When the question and answer session ended, Harold closed with a firm statement: "Delta Airlines will not tolerate discrimination in any form. We stand by our policies, our employees who do their jobs faithfully, and our passengers who place their trust in us." Over the following weeks, Simone resumed her regular life, attending high school, juggling homework, and making plans with friends. The media frenzy around her story subsided, replaced by fresher news. Occasionally, she'd get a curious stare at school from someone who recognized her name or read a snippet online, but she navigated it with newfound composure. Late one afternoon, she received a letter from Carla, the flight attendant who had tried to help her in first class. The letter read, "Simone, I'm writing to let you know that many of us at Delta were deeply troubled by what happened. I'm glad you came forward, and I wish I could have done more at the time. Thank you for standing up for yourself. It will help us all be braver when we encounter injustice, Carla." The words made Simone smile. She felt a sense of closure, knowing that employees within the airline stood by her. She pinned the letter on a corkboard in her room, a reminder of solidarity in the face of bigotry. On a crisp fall day, about 2 months after the incident, Simone learned from a family friend that Donovan Royce was facing serious financial troubles. Having lost his pilot's license and stable income, he found it nearly impossible to secure a comparable position. Word had spread in aviation circles about the humiliating reason for his dismissal. No reputable airline wanted to touch him. Some might have called it karma. Simone felt a pang of pity when she heard of his plight, but she also believed it was a direct result of his own actions. She wasn't responsible for his downfall. She had simply told the truth. Royce had dug his own grave by succumbing to prejudice and arrogance. Months turned into a year. Simone grew more mature, more aware of the broader world. She volunteered for an after-school program that mentored younger students, focusing on building self-esteem and teaching them to speak up against bullying and discrimination. She often used her own experience as an example of how standing up for one's rights can lead to important changes, even if it's scary. Harold, meanwhile, continued to expand Delta's philanthropic footprint. The airline funded scholarships aimed at minority youth who aspired to become pilots, mechanics, or other aviation professionals. The initiative was partly inspired by Simone's ordeal, an effort to ensure that future flight decks were staffed by people who truly embraced diversity and respect. On a sunny afternoon, Simone found herself once again at JFK Airport, preparing for a flight to Europe with her father, a father-daughter trip Harold had promised, as a belated celebration after the fiasco with Captain Royce had settled. Standing in the first-class lounge, Simone waited for Harold to finish a quick call. She gazed out the window at the line of planes, engines humming under the bright sky. Her thoughts were momentarily drawn back to that day, to Captain Royce's sneer, and to the bruised feeling of injustice. But she was a different person now, more self-assured. She glanced at her father, who concluded his call and joined her. "All set?" he asked, a warm smile crossing his features. She nodded, returning his smile. "All set, Dad." Side by side they headed toward the jet bridge. Simone felt a small flutter in her chest this time, not of fear, but of excitement. She had reclaimed her seat, her dignity, and her voice. The sky was her domain again, and she would let no one tell her otherwise. Reaching the end of this emotional roller coaster, we see that a single act can reveal the true colors of those in power, and we've witnessed how quickly injustice can unravel even the most solid reputation. Simone's calm resistance and Harold's swift, principled response toppled the arrogance of a man who believed he could act without consequence. Now Captain Royce faces the repercussions of his own prejudice, and Simone continues forward, stronger than ever. Let this story remind us all that real change happens when we speak out against injustice, whether it's directed at us or someone we barely know. We're asking you to help spread this message. If you believe in standing up for what's right, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support empowers more voices and keeps these vital conversations alive.